Welcome, everyone. Today we're exploring the threat of an electromagnetic pulse, EMP, attack on the United States. From its scientific roots to its potential societal impact, join us as we delve into the science, history, and vulnerabilities surrounding EMPs. Let's uncover why the US is so concerned about this potential threat. Let's dive in. Electricity is the lifeblood of modern society. Without it, our daily lives would be dramatically disrupted. Ironically, there is a broad consensus among federal and state government officials, utility companies, and high-voltage transformer manufacturers that the U.S. power grid is highly vulnerable. If compromised, it could regress America to a pre-electrified era, or even worse. Scientists from the world's leading superpower estimate that in the event of a large-scale electromagnetic pulse, EMP, attack, up to 90% of the population could perish in the worst-case scenario. And even in a more optimistic scenario, the number could be 2/3. So, how dangerous is an EMP attack, and why is the United States so susceptible? According to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Science and Technology Directorate, an electromagnetic pulse, EMP, is a burst of electromagnetic energy that can result from a nuclear explosion in the atmosphere, potentially causing widespread damage to power lines, telecommunication systems, and electronic devices. To create a widespread EMP shockwave, the explosion could occur at a low altitude of about 30 kilometers or up to 480 kilometers above the Earth's surface. Generally, the higher the explosion, the farther the destructive effects will reach. Additionally, EMPs can also be caused by non-nuclear weapons, but their impact is usually more geographically limited compared to nuclear-origin EMPs. While EMPs may not directly destroy all electronic devices in the affected area, the real danger comes from the interaction between the EMP's electric and magnetic fields with the power grid and other electronic systems on the ground. This can induce currents and voltages that cause severe damage, potentially even burning out all electronic devices simultaneously. EMPs are categorized into three types: E1, E2, and E3, sometimes referred to as short, medium, and long waves. Today, we won't delve too deeply into technical aspects. What you need to know is that long waves, E3, have the potential to cause the most significant damage. These waves will affect power transmission lines, generating electrical surges that can travel hundreds of thousands of kilometers and damage any transformer in their path. In the early 1950s, both the Soviet Union and the United States began researching non-nuclear EMPs, and at that time, it was a top-secret project until other nations started showing interest in similar weapons. Nowadays, some countries have developed EMP bombs, also known as E-bombs, compact enough to fit into a suitcase but powerful enough to incapacitate most electronic devices within a few square kilometers. Despite most EMP weapon-related projects being classified as state secrets, scientists speculate they pose a significant threat to critical infrastructure. You might remember that in 2023, from January 28th to February 4th, a high-altitude Chinese balloon intruded into Alaskan airspace, Western Canada, and the border area between Canada and the United States. When detected by NORAD, North American Aerospace Defense Command, the balloon was flying at an altitude of 18,000 meters, high enough to deploy an EMP weapon if it had one. According to the U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory, reconnaissance balloons typically have a radar cross-section of only a few percent of a square meter, comparable to a small bird, and lack significant infrared signals, making them difficult to detect or target with air defense weapons. In a 2009 study on stratospheric balloons, a U.S. Air Force major noted that despite their large size, they are hard to spot, and if hit, wouldn't fall immediately. He also mentioned that stratospheric balloons, being filled with inert gas and producing minimal heat, exhibit very small infrared signatures. Additionally, their non-metallic structure and smooth surfaces result in minimal radar reflections, making them hard to see even at high altitudes. Thus, using balloons for an EMP attack isn't a terrible idea. However, they fly slowly and are vulnerable to enemy fire once detected. Therefore, why use balloons when modern defense technology allows for EMP attacks to be launched from missiles disguised on cargo ships or from fractional orbital bombardment systems, FOBs? For those unfamiliar with FOBs, fractional orbital bombardment system, it works by flying into low Earth orbit at altitudes below 150 kilometers, enabling the missile to evade radar systems designed to detect traditional ballistic missile trajectories. Before completing a full orbit, FOBs would descend and initiate a retrograde engine burn to slow down and approach its target. This results in a sudden attack from an unexpected direction. FOBs thus possesses the capability to attack stealthily. By deploying an EMP attack using a fractional orbital bombardment system, adversaries of the United States could inflict severe damage on the country, especially the South, which lacks crucial early warning systems. Moreover, with FOBs, the enemy can strike without leaving traces, avoiding nuclear retaliation from Washington. There are many conflicting reports about EMPs that anyone can access, and alongside them, a ton of classified documents. Some have compared the EMP threat to the Y2K bug. As you might know, the Y2K bug referred to potential computer errors related to date formatting and data storage issues around the year 2000. The inability of computer systems to accurately distinguish dates could potentially disrupt the infrastructure of computer-dependent industries globally. As the year 2000 approached, public awareness grew about Y2K fears, leading some to stockpile food, water, and guns, buy backup generators, and withdraw cash, anticipating a computer-induced apocalypse. In reality, very few significant errors occurred in 2000, and certainly no apocalyptic events. Thus, comparing EMPs to Y2K implies that EMPs are not a significant threat, or, as Americans might say, a nothing burger. On the other hand, some believe an EMP explosion is a disaster waiting to happen unless actions are taken to prevent it now. A 2019 report by the Electric Power Research Institute estimated that a high-altitude EMP, HEMP, would cause prolonged blackouts across multiple states, affecting an area of about 500,000 to over 770,000 square kilometers. However, this does not mean the entire United States would be affected, and it certainly wouldn't be as dramatic as depicted in Hollywood movies. Nevertheless, the US doesn't take EMP threats lightly. The establishment of an EMP task force shows that the White House takes this issue very seriously. To understand why, let's go back to July 9, 1962. On that day, the US detonated a 1.4 megaton thermonuclear bomb, over 66 times more powerful than the Fat Man dropped on Nagasaki. The test took place at an altitude of 400 kilometers above Johnson Island, known as Starfish Prime, as part of the U.S. high-altitude nuclear testing series during the peak of the Cold War. The EMP effects from the explosion were far greater than anticipated, damaging the electrical systems in Hawaii over 1,450 kilometers away. More importantly, at the time of the explosion, 21 satellites were in orbit, and 8 were so severely damaged that they either lost significant functionality or had to end their missions. The fate of the remaining 13 satellites remains a mystery. Additionally, a significant EMP attack could devastate Starlink systems providing high-speed internet, weather satellites, and GPS. Experts like former CIA Director James Woolsey and Dr. Peter Pry, author of Blackout Wars, and a former executive director of the EMP Task Force on National and Homeland Security, believe that an EMP attack is not only catastrophic, but also the easiest way to execute widespread attacks. They assess that if a nuclear device with a yield of 10 to 20 megatons were detonated at an altitude of over 300 kilometers above U.S. airspace, the resulting EMP would destroy most electronic devices, computers, cars, and even high-voltage transformers, which are considered the heart of the national grid. Speaking of the U.S. power grid, it is touted as the largest in the world for a simple reason: its massive scale, with 11,925 power plants, 3,000 production companies, and over 32,000 kilometers of transmission lines. Due to its vast territory spanning over 9.8 million square kilometers, the U.S. grid is divided into 3 closed systems for both production and transmission: the Eastern Interconnection, the Western Interconnection, and the Texas Interconnection. A significant portion of the grid consists of transmission lines connecting power plants in cities far apart. Thus, electricity is transmitted at high voltage to enhance transport efficiency, but before distribution to customers, it must be stepped down, a critical task for high-voltage transformers. Despite comprising less than 3% of all transformers in the U.S., high-voltage transformers handle 60 to 90% of the country's electricity. As of 2023, the U.S. has about 2,100 large high-voltage transformers rated at 345 kV or higher, serving over 320,000 kilometers of transmission lines. Due to their critical role, these oversized transformers have become the Achilles heel of the U.S. power grid. With few spare transformers available, if too many are damaged at once, a catastrophic scenario could unfold. Additionally, 500 kV premium transformers are costly, ranging from $10 to $20 million each, and are custom-built, with only about 200 produced globally each year. Though the U.S. has 5 facilities capable of manufacturing large transformers, it still relies on over 80% of imports from Germany and South Korea, the only countries exporting such equipment. Moreover, the average age of high-voltage transformers in the U.S. is around 40 years, making replacement a national budget challenge. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, it took about a year to receive a transformer, a time frame that has since tripled, assuming supply chains remain intact. Along with exorbitant costs and long lead times, transporting these transformers is also challenging, given their weight of up to 410 tons. This requires specialized road and rail infrastructure, often leading to accidents during transportation. A notable incident in 2019 involved a 240-ton transformer falling from a transport vehicle, causing widespread chaos in South Florida. A large-scale EMP attack could damage an estimated 300 large transformers, with repairs taking years or even decades. Without transformers, generators would have to be connected directly to the distribution grid, risking overheating and damage, further extending power outages. The situation is even direr in the southern U.S., where heat waves could lead to mass deaths. Without air conditioning or access to cold water, staying in the shade may not be sufficient, especially for those on life support devices. In summer 2023, the U.S. reported an average of 1,500 heat-related deaths. But if an EMP attack leaves the South without power for months, the death toll would be staggering. While it may seem far-fetched, experts stress that it's better to be prepared than to regret it later. But in the event of such a disaster, could the U.S. quickly restore its power grid? In reality, the U.S. cannot produce enough high-voltage transformers to cover its vast territory. Power distribution centers don't have the time or funds to maintain significant stockpiles, leading to prolonged outages. Notably, in 2020, the Trump administration recognized this issue, issuing Executive Order 13920 to ensure bulk power systems and equipment were protected from foreign threats. While there hasn't been a major attack on the U.S. power grid, significant vulnerabilities have been exposed. For instance, in April 2013, 100 transformers were disabled after armed assailants fired on a substation in California, causing a near catastrophe. Although the FBI investigated the incident, no arrests were made. Moreover, as of 2015, over 300 cases of EMP device usage have been reported in the U.S., indicating the country is not immune to EMP attacks. Thus, it's crucial to raise public awareness about this issue, urging the government and utility companies to take proactive measures. As the world's #1 superpower, the U.S. cannot afford to risk its future. The question remains, is an EMP attack imminent, or is it just a sci-fi horror story? Only time will tell.